Well, kia ora koutou. My name's Tash from Greater Wellington Regional Council, and we're going to do a bit of a masterclass today on catchment management and what makes successful catchment groups. I'm going to throw over to these guys soon, and they're going to do a bit of an introduction onto themselves and their individual story, and we're going to talk about how we connect it into catchment management. But I'm just going to give a brief outline on our masterclass. So we're going to tell our story, we're going to talk about why that matters, why catchment management is important in successful catchment groups. We're going to talk about how we've done it, share a little bit of the stuff that we've learnt, and then we're going to talk about what you guys could do within your own catchments. Oh, but the main purpose, I missed out that bit, the main purpose of our catchment, of our masterclass is in order to have successful catchment management and successful catchment groups is you need true partnership and commitment. So no more partnership where you say, yes, I'd love to work with you, but only on the bits that I want you to. And none of this sort of fake collaboration stuff where you say, yes, I'd love to collaborate, but only for a particular milestone period, for a particular financial year. That's not real, and that's not going to lead to successful catchment management. So that's our main purpose today. So I'll hand over to you guys to introduce yourselves.
Thanks. So I'm Josh Brown. I'm a consultant, but I'm working about 60% of my time with the Hurunui District Landcare Group. So that's in North Canterbury. I've been working with that group for about 5 years, but the group's existed since 2014 in various shapes. And just try a brief background on what the group is. They started off out of a plan change that they didn't like, decided to fight it, were successful, but found out that it was going to burn everybody out, and really quite emotionally taxing on all those involved. So in about 2019, I keep changing the years, they pivoted and moved towards, they asked the farmers what they wanted, the community what they wanted, and it was they wanted support on the ground. And so we're fortunate, Simon, or Soft-Cider, came along with a big pot of gold. We took some of that, and we've been running a project since 2020 that runs out in June next year, and then the group will no doubt morph again, and that's part of the process over the next 12 months for us.
Yeah, kia ora koutou everyone. Simon Hunt from Te Uraka, New Zealand Forest Service. Bit of background for me is that, probably 8-9 years ago, I was an RMA compliance officer, one of the regional councils, and when we had challenges in rural areas, I'd turn to land management officers. And I learned a lot about farm plans and also the importance of relationships. So I find myself these days as a senior forest and land use advisor, and I was involved a couple of years ago in allocating a bit of money to catchment groups. So we saw applications from throughout the country from a range of catchment groups, and since then there's been ongoing relationships with quite a few of these groups, including Wairarapa here and Hurunui, which is how I got to meet these three. And it's been really valuable educational to watch how these groups operate, and once they've set out to achieve their various objectives as well. So we can get into a bit of that later. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Richard Johns. I'm from Wairarapa in the Wairarapa. Work alongside Tash with our catchment group. I'm not actually at Greater Wellington. I just got the name tag there. So, our catchment group started in around 2017. We started doing some water testing and things like that, gained a bit of momentum, and had some good structures in place. And then the money flowed after that, thanks to Simon, and everyone knows Simon.
And just on my role at Regional Council, I'm the team leader of the land management planning team. So we've got 12 land management advisors for our region, 9 in the Wairarapa and 3 in the Wellington side of things. We have been working with rural landowners since the 50s, mostly predominantly one-on-one with rural landowners in farm planning services. We've got lots of money to do lots of good action, and that's how we sort of got connected with these catchment groups, actually through Andrew there, who's gone to ECAN, but when he was the land management advisor, then I sort of came in to support as well, and then we've been learning through Wairarapa as we've gone. So I think this is a really good example of how successful catchment management can work. You've got farmers, you've got regional councils, you've got consultants, and you've got tūrerako or the ministries as well. So why are successful catchment groups and catchment management connected? Why does this all matter? The operating environment has changed, and Josh is going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. The ever-changing policy landscape, which we know we've talked about the last couple of days, lots of policy around. There's large funding opportunities, and there's a huge amount of expertise already within our region. So it's about not duplicating the pots of money or the expertise, and working together.
So I won't be telling you anything you don't already know, but I think it's worth highlighting just how the operating environment has changed for regional councils and catchment groups. Catchment groups aren't new, they've been around for decades, they've been around, going back to the 50s or, I don't know, probably earlier. But they have evolved a bit over the last few years. And if you go back 10 years, there was an increase in the number of catchment groups that were forming as you got an increase in the regulation that was affecting a lot of these farmers. And then in the last 5 years, there was a big bump in the catchment groups, and one of the things that changed was that groups that had traditionally been funded by regional councils were then funded by central government through different agencies there. And one of my observations with that is it's changed the relationships that catchment groups and farmers have with their regional councils. Some positive, some negative. I think it's not anything too much to comment on other than that it is something to be aware of with this. The other thing is that there's been a massive boost in funding, and I was at the Catchment Group Forum 2 weeks ago, and the ministers essentially said that that's not going to continue. There will be some funding going forward, but there is also, it's not going to be to the same level, and there's a huge increase in number of catchment groups. So catchment groups are now going to have to figure out, okay, what do we operate, having going from big highs to dropping back down, and then there'll be other groups that still don't have any funding yet. So it's keeping an eye on that. I think the thing that I take away from all of that is that catchment groups have been around a long time. They do all go through ebbs and flows, and they are a critical piece of the infrastructure going forward.
And I think one of our key points to this is that you come together with a shared outcomes. So everyone is different. You're going to have differences within the community, just like you do within your own families. You're going to disagree on certain stuff, right? You've got different values, you've got different drivers. But the big thing is that you will connect on some things, and it's to come to that shared outcome and work together, and you lean on everyone's individual expertise rather than duplicating. Lots of money out there at the moment, so we don't want to duplicate the pots of money, but you also don't want to duplicate the skill that's already out there. A big thing with that difference is to actually acknowledge that there is differences, and that's all good. That's normal, and that it's hard, and you actually need to be working together along the way, but also learning from each other. Those hard points are where you are going to learn. If you're not ready to open to learn, if you're actually not coming for that shared outcome, you're not going to learn, and you're not going to have successful catchment groups or lead to good catchment management. So now we're going to go on to our hopefully more exciting part, was what we've actually learned, how we've done it. So when we did a bit of a brainstorm together, we came up with a few bullet points of what we thought were some really key parts to successful catchment groups and catchment management, and that was to have good governance and decision-making framework, to have the right people in the room, because you don't know what you don't know. You need to have a catchment plan, and these can be in different forms, but this is your strategic direction around it all. You need to create buy-in. I've talked about the shared purposes and outcomes. And you need to have real commitment to continue and support. And you need to be realistic that it is really hard, and you need to change as you go and just keep going. We've got this little thing down the bottom about saying that catchment management is complex, and that was the whole reason for this conference. How do we deal with complexity in the landscape? And we often use the word complexity as a bit of a slogan, a bit of a nice word these days, but what that means is that there's not one solution, and there shouldn't be. It is complex for a reason, and to acknowledge that there shouldn't be one reason. It needs multiple people to work together, multiple solutions, multiple different things. That's the beauty of catchment management and catchment groups. That's what we need. And so in order to deal with that complexity, deal with that change and the differences between us, we need to have a really good framework to be able to deal with all that and be transparent about how we're doing that over time. You guys want to chip in on that?
Rightio. So in Wainui, we set up our catchment group in 2017. The governance and the setup and the framework was one of the things that we quickly realised we had to sort out. So we realised if we wanted to get any funding, we would need a bank account, and if we needed a bank account, we need an entity. So we formed an incorporated society with a chair, a secretary, deputy chair, and a treasurer, and committee members and things like that. And then, the actual setting up the bank account as well. These things all take time. Some people, these things are quite easy to sort out. Some people it's not. So you go to the people where they find these things easy. We had an accountant living in our catchment. He helped with the setting up of the incorporated society, and we found out you had to have a seal and you had to have a stamp and things like this, and we did the strange things that are in the rules, and so he knew this stuff and he got it sorted for us, and so having the right people doing the right jobs. It's only one job each. If they do one thing each, it can happen quite easily. And then if there's someone that's not in the circle who doesn't know something that you need done, find a friend. And council's been great with us.
Talking about governance, just the point I'd add to what Richard's talking about is the value of someone like Richard in actually pulling these groups together. It is the local people in these communities that are the reason that they work, and I think quite often, not quite often, sometimes they are undervalued, and so as someone that's working alongside them, it's making sure, one, that you value them, and two, that you support them in whatever way you can. It's something that I've seen with our committee as a whole, is that there are ebbs and flow in their enthusiasm, and that you need to, one, appreciate that happens, and two, figure out ways, okay, how can we actually work in alongside our committee or whatever governance structures they have in place to be able to support them.
Just to follow on from that, where we've seen, I guess, less successful results is when there isn't that decision-making framework in place. So we do and encourage that strong process that, from what I've seen from Richard's group, when they're able to have confidence and faith in that system, and they understand why the decisions are being made, and there's transparency behind it as well, without that knowledge vacuum.
So a little more on our governance structure. So when we received the funding from MPI and Jobs for Nature to the tune of $2.3 million, we sort of had to get organised, so to speak. And so we've got the community, and then we've got the members of our society, and then we've got our committee members, and then above the committee members, we've got the working group. So there's 4 of us committee members that sit on that. And then we've got an operations man who's full-time implementing the project. And then we have a consultant that's helping us write up our milestone reports and things and offering guidance. We've got the regional council offering guidance. And then right around that, again, we've got a advisory group. And so we have regional council, district council, fed farmers, local iwi, the school, any sort of entities with skin in the game. We meet around twice or 3 times a year, and they're actually coming out tomorrow, and we do a bit of a field trip, have a look at what some of the work we've been doing, and then any issues, we lean on them, and we also, they help us with guidance and making the right decisions. And then when you've got a big decision to make that might be a little bit out of left field, and everyone supports that, then you know that if it gets sticky with the funders, which it never has, but it's, they've got support from all sides.
You guys are very quiet compared to other ones.
Got some questions?
Oh yeah.
So the question was, do we have iwi representation at the top of that structure on the working group? The answer to that is no. They are involved in the advisory group. We've approached them, had an initial meeting, and their capacity at their end is quite thin. They have a lot of catchment groups and a lot of entities approaching them. Oh, can you be involved? And their capacity is just not there. But they do support what we're doing. Yeah, they had capacity to sit on the advisory. Yeah.
And with our group, similar answer to Richard's is that yes, we've been a slow process developing a relationship with the local rinaka. There has been an invitation which has been put several times for them to sit on our governance group, but we've met with them and they've said, look, they don't have the capacity at the moment, and we've appreciated that, and so we can send updates when we can, and we have been up to the marae, but it is something that I think we've accepted and they've accepted as just a long-term commitment to stay in touch with each other and make sure that we're communicating. Yeah.
I've got one thing to add on that about our reporting. So we have a full-time operations man running our project, and on the first of every month he puts out a report. There's a few photos in there and a bit of an update on what's been happening. That report goes to quite an extensive email list, and the iwi are part of that list. So we had a question about the accountant that helped us set up our incorporated society. If it wasn't, that Andrew was our accountant there. If it wasn't for him, there'd be someone else. A bit of a strange one setting up an incorporated society, because right now I'm thinking, who do you approach? So you've just got to ask around. Luckily, we had a guy there that he was doing the books for quite a few non-for-profit organisations, so that's where he had his foot in the door there, I guess.
As well as good governance, it said decision-making framework, and I'm just interested in how you got to a decision-making framework, and is it written down and that sort of thing.
So we bore the committee to tears about once a year with a budget, and they've all got to sit there and go through it, and we go through the whole thing about what we're going to be spending. Our operations man's blimmin' good with the money, he's right on it, and then we have a sort of 10% variance, and so all the bills come in, and as long as they're within the 10% variance, then we don't have to go back to committee. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward in that respect. So the question was about the wider community being part of that decision process. So back in 2017, we had the community meeting, basically asking for community support. Everyone put their hand in the air, so that was a green light there. We put out newsletters every 6 months or so to update the community with my contact details as chair. The phone never rings. I mean, occasionally catch up, in conversation, but no one's ringing up saying, oh, you're making the wrong decision. And then we also have like the AGM, it's a community meeting, everyone's invited. So we do try and involve the community when we can, but I think they're pretty happy with getting $2.3 million to do good stuff. There's not too many arguments there.
How do you decide who gets trees? Like which landowner?
Okay, so how do you decide who gets the trees? So we received the 2.3 million, but we had to have a plan around how that's to be spent. Dave Cameron is semi-retired consultant who was working with Tash for years at the Regional Council. His bread and butter. So he drew up a plan, visited all the farmers, rode round their farms, inspected sites, and drew up an implementation plan from that, which our ops guy, who is also ex-regional council, used to work with Dave, used to work with Tash. These guys know each other well, they get on well. It's so easy. Just having the right people that get on, the plan's there, follow the plan, simple stuff.
That was before you were allocated the funding, so you presented that plan with your application?
No, so before they got the funding, so I think one thing to remember with the funding is that it is for a discrete period of time, and I think it can be a bit noisy, I think, for catchment groups to be clouded by this pot of money. Wairarapa had already a catchment plan. It wasn't like complete, but it was pretty much there in terms of what their vision was, what they wanted to achieve. And so Regional Council was really working with them, and Beef and Lamb were already at the table as well. And then the opportunity came up for this funding through COVID. So we were able to think, okay, well, this is the catchment plan. We presented it to the funders. This is the sort of vision for the catchment. We'd like some money, please, to be able to do some of the actions to accelerate towards the vision was the idea. And then when the operational plan came out, it was about targeting areas within the catchment, either the highly erodible land, the area that need to be targeted in terms of riparian management, right tree, right place within the catchment to accelerate those outcomes. That was generally the idea. Yeah, once you had it allocated. And the funding, like all types of funding, there's criteria around it. So Billion Trees was about planting trees, obviously, and the Jobs for Nature was about building capability, capacity. So that money was sort of used to employ people, and then the trees were obviously for the trees. There's always a bit of balance as well with engagement, that you're not just always going to do it in the best spot within the catchment. You've got to balance it with what landowners actually want to do, and there's never going to be a bad spot. Ideally, we do have it sort of mapped out within the catchment where are the sort of high risk areas, but as long as you're chipping away at that, I think that's all good. You've got to balance that engagement.
Our answer is probably a bit more of a learning from the process, and part of it is from us as a group, and part of it is probably some thoughts for funders. The space that we had to develop our planting project was very short, so we went from not knowing anything about this to 3 weeks later essentially signing a contract with Te Rako to plant 80 hectares of trees worth $1.5 million. So our approach was we opened it up to applications from our members. So we have 300 members. We opened it up. We did get some advice from some ecologists in the district in terms of, broadly speaking, areas that should be targeted. But ultimately we were dictated by the applications that came in. And so we've ended up with 48 landowners involved. I think we've been quite successful, but there would be definitely areas that if you want to take a more strategic approach, you would do some of that groundwork. And that's one of the things we've taken on board during this time, is actually we need to be doing groundwork both for future funding opportunities, but also just for our farmers in general. That work wasn't there. Nobody had paved the way for us. So, well, look, if we're going to do this going forward, biodiversity is something we need to be aware of. So let's do that ourselves. And so we're working with the Hurunui Biodiversity Trust on that at the moment.
So for our sort of last slide, we were trying to think about what you guys could do within your own regions. We've shared some examples of what we've learned within our funding pots and how we've sort of come together, but I'm certain that there's any role of anyone here at NZARM has a part to play within catchment management and catchment groups. And you may think, oh yeah, I don't really work with catchment groups, I'm not going to go out into a rural hall, but I do think it is our responsibility to be able to help these catchment groups in some way, shape or form. There is lots of powers and influence and areas of you can control. If you can change your pots of money in order to help people, you should do that. If you can't, what else can you control? There's lots and lots of different things, different skills you can provide to our catchment groups. We've talked about over the last 2 days all of these different pressures, lots of policy changes. We feel it within regional council, so do the landowners. It's not all on the landowners and it's not all on regional council. There's just too much for everyone to be doing. If we think about freshwater farm plans coming out, we're just given the example of this in the last masterclass. This is the prime example where we don't want to see duplication. So it's going to create the perfect environment for more people to come up in this space and build capacity and capability in New Zealand. Fantastic. But another risk of that is that we're going to be duplicating services. So when people want a freshwater farm plan and they're going to require one, use what's already there. If your council has a farm plan, if you've got a Fonterra farm plan, beef and lamb, whatever, balance, all really, really good farm plans, use that information and then build off it. A consultant should then come in as a certified farm planner and pretty much finish it off. We shouldn't be trying to duplicate what we're already doing. We should be working together to help these farmers so they can actually have good farm plans, which will lead to good catchment management at the end of the day. But
my 2 cents on things, what can you do, is don't undervalue your role as a trusted connector, someone that's you may not necessarily have the answer, but you'll more than likely know someone that will have the answer, and that's something that we've seen with our group, with our catchment group in particular, is that there's so many people out there, but that doesn't necessarily mean the farmers know that they're there or which ones they should be going to, and we're only going to see more and more of that as the space gets more complex. So making sure that you are coming to things like this and just touching base with the people out there is really important.
In terms of what are the gaps, so I'm sure as you all know, the more successful groups are those that have that clear vision and they have that clear objective of what they're trying to achieve. So whether it be fresh water, whether it be biodiversity, whether it be erosion control, whether it be training, jobs, those that are able to keep it fairly simple and fairly focused usually have the really good outcomes. And they know, and they're usually in contact early. I'd encourage those groups to keep their dialogue, to keep those relationships going, because it just makes that relationship stronger and people are able to achieve better things, I think. The groups we deal with, often it can become, many voices at the table. This is where I get back to that decision-making framework. From what I've seen, people come at these catchment groups with a lot of ideas, a lot of things they'd like to see. If there's a simple vision and a few simple outcomes they're focused on, it makes life a lot easier for everyone.
So the only thing I'd add there is about people. So it's all about the people and the right people, and you need doers, not talkers. So within your own framework, you need people that'll actually, you ask them to do something, they'll do it. A secretary that will do the donkey work, a treasurer who will actually draw up the reports, the finances and things. And then if they don't do it, you've got to find someone else, and then partner with, it's all about personalities. If there's an entity that there's trouble with, get someone else to deal with them, or something that overcome the hurdles. Basically, we've got a great relationship with Greater Wellington, and I hope it continues. Just a question here.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question around that. So you formed the group, you've got it going, and then are there challenges around keeping the momentum going, and what might some of those challenges be, and how would you kind of overcome them?
Challenges of keeping the momentum going. Yes, that's a good question. I guess you've just got to look for the next project, basically, and then try and keep the momentum going that way.
The Hurunui District Landcare Group's experiences, they were very close to falling over in about mid-2018 after spending 4 years arguing policy with essentially the rest of the community, and it became incredibly divisive in the Hurunui, where it was essentially dairy against sheep and beef. what kept the momentum was a committee that, yes, their enthusiasm did wane, but they were still committed to the community, and they still saw, lack of a better word, vision in what they were doing in terms of what the catchment group could be. And then so it was just being able to take that moment to pause and say, okay, where do we need to shift this group to continue to be not only relevant but effective in the community. And so ultimately it just comes down to those people in the room. There's no other way you can get around that.
Collier touched on it. Just how do you deal with burnout? Like, what happens if Richard fell over, or if Josh, got a 6-figure, 7-figure job offer? What's a contingency plan going forward for your groups? And was it factored into the funding agreement as a milestone to have that in place, so once the funding dries up, you guys can continue doing the great stuff you do?
What contingency fallbacks do these groups have in terms of key people? And is that built into funding agreements? No, we don't. Yes, we should. We have been incredibly fortunate. Our chairman for the last 7-8 years has been Ben Ensor, and him amongst the rest of the committee have been key in driving it. Succession is something that keeps coming up. Have we nailed that yet? No, we haven't. I think there is some redundancy built into that. It isn't just one person, but the one person tends to take on quite a bit, and I suspect Richard is the same, but he might have a different answer.
Yes, burnout is an issue. I'm a slow typer, that doesn't help. So you just got to find passionate people, really. And if there's a group of passionate people, it makes it easy. We use Messenger for the working group. Conversation on there all the time around decision making and where things are at. That's good. I think for the duration of our funding, that the 3-year project, it just seems to make sense to keep the same crew. Possibly there'll be a change of the guard after that's finished. I'm not too sure, but I've suddenly realised that I'm in the middle of the age group of the farmers in our community now, and there's a big whack of guys that are sort of in their mid-20s to mid-30s, and they're starting to join the fire brigade and have kids and join the schooling system and things like that. So there's a new batch coming through, and there's some energy there. So future looks good.
I think too, this sort of touches on the other question about momentum. I think it would be good if the funding was longer. Like 3 years isn't a long period of time in terms of catchment management. So I think that could be definitely improved on. But I think also pausing to tell their success stories. So the Wairarapa, they won an award. They won the Landcare Trust Catchment Group Award at the Balance Farm Environment Awards for the Greater Wellington this year. So I think that's a really cool to be recognised regionally and to celebrate that success, because I think you do get sucked up in the churn of the contract to spend that money, plant those trees, which is all really good stuff. But if you're not really on the ground, if you're not a farmer who particularly gets that plant on your land, you can still connect in it, because you actually need to pause, you need to stop, you need to recognise that that was hard, but you're being recognised in many, many different ways. I think that's really important for catchment groups to stop and think about what they have learnt. If you think about what these guys have learnt along the way, they've learnt to deal with millions of dollars as an entity that they usually wouldn't have, and all the stuff that comes with it, project management, working with stakeholders, how to engage multiple landowners, all the changing regulation. So that in itself, I think will actually feed the momentum, because we need to, I think we get caught up in these buckets of money that they are accelerating the stuff that we want to do, but it is just that it's accelerating the stuff we want to do. If you really know what you want to do, that momentum should always be there regardless if you've got the money or not. It's just going to take longer.
I just have a question. So I'm the forestry liaison on a catchment group that's just starting out in Gisborne, and they've sort of only just now forming an incorporated society. And I guess my question's just around with the outlook on funding opportunities, like what would you recommend in terms of trying to get the group off the ground? Without the funding, we're going to have a seed fund to try and pay like a facilitator, but in terms of outlook with funding after the Minister's comments yesterday, any recommendations in terms of keeping momentum from such an early stage?
So getting your group set up, my first phone call would be to your council. I believe it's a Unitarian, so they're on board, so you've got them there. The other one would be MPI, Forestry Association, Beef and Lamb, all entities, just let them know what you're doing and, put the hand out for help and see what comes back, and then try and build some relationships and just, get some friends around you.
I would comment on just doing something fun together as a catchment group. So we, as council, provide a little bit of seed funding just to do like a planting out a corner or something, you drive past as a catchment group and just doing something fun, having a barbecue, having a few beers together, and sort of solidifying why you want to come together as a group. But thinking about why you want money, I think there's actually nothing worse as a funder that someone rings you up and say, I'd like some money, please. And you're like, cool, what would you like it for? Not sure. But I'd love the money. It's not helpful, right? So I think if you had a group, sometimes you actually don't need money. So I work with lots of catchment groups that start together and they think that they need the millions of dollars. And I'm like, well, what do you actually want to do? Oh, we just want to get together and we want to be neighbourly and we want to just be good neighbours. You're like, okay, well, you don't need money to do that, but here's some small steps you could do. So there's lots of things you can do, but knowing why you want to come together, having a few barbecues to start off with, recognising that majority of those farmers will already be doing good stuff. So why don't you celebrate stuff that's already happening in your catchment, bring everyone around, show all the good stuff that those landowners are already doing because they're already investing thousands and thousands of dollars into their farms. Celebrate that.
Another thing that's good to do at the start is find out what the status quo is. Do some water testing, share that data within the group, and pick off a small, easy project like putting up a roadside sign.
Any other questions?
With the freshwater farm plans, having a kind of a catchment context, how do you see your groups kind of, where do you see them, what role do you see them in that, setting up kind of the catchment objectives to go into these farm plans?
So the question was, what role do catchment groups play in catchment context for freshwater farm plans? An important role if the framework allows it. And I think all of the regional councils would love catchment groups to be involved with the catchment context. I think that's a pretty easy statement to make. But there's going to be time constraints to be able to do that in terms of do all the councils have time to do that before 2024, or is it going to be an evolution process? And I suspect it's going to be an evolution process, which means that those catchment groups need to be made aware that it's going to be an evolution and given the support and resources to be able to be involved in those processes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think it will be an evolution, but as I think Ian mentioned yesterday, that the land management functions of regional councils already know those catchments. Yes, of course, it's going to be great to have more and more data, understanding where we are in terms of our limits and measuring that improvement over time. That's going to be really important. But we really have really good expertise that we know what those catchments are like. We know what the issues are for those catchments. So I think pulling together what those essential catchments are for freshwater farm plans, I don't think will be a problem. And I think to engage with the group that's already there is actually going to be much easier for a regional council. So we won't have to necessarily go knocking on the doors of every individual landowner. We could do that in a catchment group setting to help with those freshwater farm plans. But that might be different for other councils.
When you've got quite a mix of land uses and land parcel sizes, and so you've got lots of lifestylers and some commercial farmers and some forestry and some this and some that. How does that go?
Question was, how does it go when you have different land uses, different diverse communities? how do you what's a short answer to that? I don't know if there is a short answer. It's just working in communities in these places. It's maybe Richard has a better.
It's not a problem. We've got a wide range. I mean, our catchment group only covers 22,000 hectares, so, and of that, forestry is about 6,000. So they're a big player. Fairly silent one, to be fair. They are doing their own thing. They are looking after their own space, but they are involved in our group. We've got 2 or 3 lifestylers on the committee, and they're quite active. And yeah, every voice has an equal volume.
Yeah, I think the differences are actually the strengths of the groups, and you just need to acknowledge that difference. We've seen it across the Wairarapa. I work with lots of different catchment groups, and we're lucky with the Wairarapa because they are predominantly sheep and beef farmers, all with farm plans. So that does make that slightly easier. But other catchment groups, if you've got a town in there and lifestylers and alpacas and lots of random stuff, that does make it much more trickier. But again, I think it's about that shared outcome. I think you need to be realistic. Your timeframes will be slower. So getting that agreement, that consensus, that buy-in is going to take much longer, I think, with a more diverse community. But as long as you're committed to that's okay. I think we're moving.
Like, we're 20 minutes from town, so the lifestylers live there because they want to. So, you know, it's all good stuff, you know. Yeah.
Right, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming along. One more to go. But thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers.